hello. It felt like a long weekend. We did not have any conversation after a Penn State football game. The last time I talked to everybody was Thursday. Fitz, how are you doing? Welcome to the BWI Live Show.
Been even longer for me. Sorry, I missed last week. I was unavoidably detained, but thanks to the people on BlueWhaleIllustrated.com for carrying the load once again, and glad to be back.
Yeah, we're glad to have you back too. So let's talk about this week and what we're going to talk about on the show today. First off, Fitz has a recruiting update for you coming up in just a few moments once I'm done setting the stage for you. We'll also have Between the Lines. Nate Bauer will be joining us. I know that you're shocked that he's having technical difficulties before the show. So he's getting those squared away. He'll be joining us in just a few minutes. And then, of course, we have the James Franklin press conference to talk about there. We're going to do some previewing of Kent State this weekend, important things to know about the game. And then, of course, your questions throughout the show and on the BWI Mailbag to end. So all of that on the way for you. But let's get into the meaty, big, juicy update on Fitz's recruiting update. Of course, a bye week is not a bye week. And we'll get into some of the context about maybe some of the fears about the game itself coming up this weekend. But for the recruiting side of things, it's an opportunity to do a little bit more. So, Fitz, there's some things that happened this weekend. You get to what do you got in today's update for fans?
Yeah, it's a bye week, but obviously not an off week. I think that's the old saying there. Coaches on the road is a hallmark of the bye week. The argument about should coaches be on the road, shouldn't they be at home fixing things, is always happening. But it happened less last week because there have been some rule changes where it takes some days away off the road. And that's been something that the college coaches have been fighting for a long time. Suffice to say, they don't want to go out during the season. You know, it's one of those necessary things that they have to do. But they've really cut down. So only a few guys were out last week. James Franklin was on the road with Kenny Sanders. Didn't talk about that. Wasn't on last week to talk about when Kenny Sanders went along with him for his first day out. They dropped by Lyric Samuel in New York. They went to Scranton to see Tavian Branch, 2026 offensive lineman. And then they went down to McDonough and watched the game at McDonough. Of course, Jeff Exeter's there, but also Brendan Finney, who actually popped up at Michigan the following day. This is an obvious flip target for Penn State. It's a very important one for Penn State. They've got corners, but Finney has been a top guy for them for a long time. He's, of course, committed to Oregon, went to Michigan. Texas has been around. Ohio State's been around. A bunch of different schools have been floating there. So I would not write that one off to Oregon just yet. Penn State is going to have to lean on their relationship there because, I mean, they're not spending with Ohio State. They're not spending with Oregon. They're not spending with Texas. Maybe Michigan. Maybe that's one that you can throw some hope in there. But Kenny Sanders went down there. He's, of course, a McDonough grad. Last week, they hit the road, of course, late in the week. They do their practice fairly normal, but kind of gets light during the week or toward the end of the week. Coordinators run things. So Franklin went out once again with Kenny Sanders. They went to the DMV. They hit spots like DeMatha, of course. LeVar Keys, 2026 wide receiver commit, is there. They were at Georgetown Prep. Emmanuel Iheanacho, the 5-star offensive lineman in 2026. These aren't recruiting stops. These aren't stops where you just go and talk to the kid like you can in different times during the recruiting calendar. These are evaluation stops where you get a look at what you want to look at, pop your head in the door and make sure you're seen, basically. Franklin also went to IMG to watch IMG Mount Zion Prep. Of course, IMG has a bunch of guys. Michael Carroll's down there. I just don't see that happening, guys. I mean, I know he's an in-state kid. He's a legacy kid. He went to Miami this weekend. So, the door's not shut to other schools, but I don't think they're open to Penn State's approach.
That seems like one of those where we talk about guys from the Northeast that go to IMG and they're no longer from the Northeast. Like, they are now a Southern prospect. It seems like with those guys, if you make that decision, you're probably not on Penn State's not on your radar. Is that a fair way of putting that?
Yeah, I mean, if it weren't for the connections, I don't think they'd be on at all. Obviously his dad played here. Steve Wiltfong was on Josh Newberg's show on the On3 YouTube network. Thinks he's going to stick with Alabama. He says that the Bama staff had an NIL related conversation with Michael Carroll after his weekend trip to Miami. Of course, Miami's NIL is different than it was at the start. I mean, it was all just one guy, John Ruiz, throwing his life wallet money at it. It's kind of righted that ship, and they're doing a good job. Of course, got Cam Ward, who might win the Heisman Trophy, so that's a good one there. But yeah, things are going well in that regard, and I don't want to say on the up and up because it's NIL, but it's more realistically feasible for Miami now. So
a little more balanced.
More well balanced. I mean, yeah, we'll go with well balanced. That works. But yeah, Carroll, I think, is still going to end up at Alabama. Missouri was in on that. Of course, Missouri's been spending too. So like, I don't think this is a Penn State recruitment at that one. So, but he was still there at IMG. Of course, IMG is loaded all the time. They've got prospects from here to 2027, 2028 guys that Penn State has offered. So there's a lot to look at there. Also went to South Florida, saw the commitments down there. I wrote a story on Friday about Beckham Kritza, about what's going on with Penn State and Beckham Kritza. I recommend you check that out. I'm not going to talk all that much about it, except he's still not the starter at Miami Central, which is definitely the antenna's up on that one. So check that out on blueillustrated.com. But yeah, it was an active week. Ty Howell was also out, but yeah, really, really cut back on those visits, because every time you make a stop, every time you're spend a day on the road, it counts against you now, which the coaches like. It's just going to be a change. So that's where they're at with that.
Oh, Ryan and I talked about that a little bit on Thursday, and talking about how strategic you have to be with the number of coaches that go, and obviously having somebody go with Franklin eats into those days. So do you see priority in this travel schedule of these are the most important recruits, or is it more target dense areas? And so like, we're going to see Emmanuel Iheanacho because he's in that area, not necessarily because he's a high priority player, which he probably is, but like should you read too much into the players that they went to evaluate versus the areas they went to evaluate?
No, it's an area thing, and it's a commit thing. So they're trying to hit all these commits during this evaluation period. You'll see that play out throughout the season. He'll get down to Pittsburgh at some point, maybe be this week. Get down to Pittsburgh this week and see guys like Deshaun Purnett, Tyke Hayes, those guys. So it's more about area convenience. I mentioned DeMatha, Georgetown Prep, but also Gonzaga. Some of those the heavy hitters down there, and it's basically what it comes down to. Somebody asked about St. Francis. Well, St. Francis is kind of removed. It's in Baltimore, so it's, even though it's a Maryland school, DMV, technically DMV. Baltimore, some people consider it DMV. Some people kind of turn their nose up at that, but it's more regional. And then they went to South Florida, saw Kobe Howard, saw Beckham Kritza. So it's just hitting these spots and making the most of your time on the road. And he's got the helicopter where he can hop around. He's got the jet where he can go from DMV to southern West Virginia to see Daniel Jennings, and then hop down to Florida. Of course, that's a typical flight path anyway.
Of course.
So yeah, everybody makes that stop in Princeton, West Virginia. So that's basically where we're at with that. I guess moving on, we got some movements in the On3 rankings. Not a big update yesterday, but still one where a couple of guys moved in the right direction. The 3-star guys, really. I don't think there was much change in the On300. I think it's been a situation where some of these guys, some of these lower level, or not lower level, but some of these lower ranked guys may end up being some of the better players in the class. We've seen that before, obviously. A couple guys that moved up slightly. It's not going to catch much of the radar, but Tyke Hayes moved up. He's an 89. He's, of course, having another brilliant season at Aliquippa. Michael Troutman, who I highlighted last week, the offensive lineman from New Jersey, went up a point to 88. Might be the high water mark there, just based on growth and growth potential, but still moving in the right direction. He's a heck of a football player. Randy Adarica. This is a really intriguing one to me. He is also at Miami Central. Had a really, really good camp workout with Deion Barnes this summer. And Penn State, I think, came away pleasantly surprised by that one. Of course, if you remember that one, he was set to commit to Miami. Miami said no. Turn around, committed to Penn State. Penn State said, okay, we can take you here. It's going to be a South Florida recruitment. Probably haven't heard the last of it, but at the same time, it's a quality player. And when you take a chance on a guy like that and the other school that's local says no, it kind of puts a little bit of doubt in the back of your mind. And then Kobe Howard up a point. He's at Chaminade Madonna, of course, played well on the national stage to open the season. So some guys moving in the right direction. That's what you want to see this time of year.
Yeah, and just quickly, I apologize. Michael Troutman and your deep dive into him. He's one of the guys we haven't talked a whole lot about in this class because of not only just his literal size, but also where he is in the rankings. And you mentioned him in the rankings. So what did you find, I guess, when you went and you did a deep dive on him?
He's the best offensive lineman player, high school player in this class so far. I know Malachi Goodman's the highly ranked. Owen Alicini, of course, highly ranked on a 3 as well. But you put on the tape for Troutman, he just destroys people. And
Fascinating.
the thing that's going to come up is I was extremely high on Mike Miranda years ago because you put on his tape, he destroyed people. CJ Thorpe, same way. Where Troutman differs a little bit, he's got the length to back it up. And he's got 33-inch arms, which sort of negate that 6'2.5" frame. 6'2", he's about 6'2.5", 290 right now. So like size is going to be an issue, no doubt about that. So that's when I say it might be the high watermark for him as a prospect. There aren't too many guys that are 6'2.5" that go high in the draft. There certainly are. You can find them. But Troutman is just a heck of a player, two-way player at DePaul. They played good counsel a couple of weeks ago. He was fantastic. I'm waiting for that film to be uploaded to see it with my own eyes, but I've been told by people that were there, he might've been the best player in the field there. So Troutman is one of those guys with those high floor guys. We'll see where that ceiling develops, but you certainly need those guys. I was surprised when Penn State took him just because of the trends that they've had in terms of getting bigger. Most of their offensive linemen, 6'4" to 6'8" now with Egan Boyer. They're big. They're big guys. And Troutman is not. He's not a big guy, but he is a bully. He is fun to watch, and he's been mauling some people in his senior year.
And if you want more recruiting content, of course, that's where you go. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is the place for Penn State recruiting content. We have a full show of it coming up on Thursday, but don't wait. Get in on all that stuff right now. And also, this is something we'll be touching on just a little bit, but Fitz, while we're here, just to put an end on this is not recruiting, but our featured article today over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, feedback from Penn State's bye week practices. If you want to know what was going on, this is the information that you look for. This is what we deliver to you at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. The reason I bring it up now is because that and recruiting, that's more than $1 worth of information. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1. You can read all the information about who was at practice, how practice went, the important things they worked on this weekend, and of course last week during the bye week, heading into a very important game against Kent State that we're going to be getting to in just 1 second. So once again, for you on our YouTube channel, take the dive. Code PSU1 to get 2 months for $1, or just go whole hog, sign up for the full year at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because then we can just talk to you forever. Like the show doesn't have to end. We just talk to you on the website. Going to bring in a very important guest for this next spot, which is Nate Bauer joining us. Did either of you get to Antifragile this weekend?
Not this weekend. I was out of town all last weekend and then had to go out of town over the weekend as well. So I've not been there, but I will be there this week at some point.
Nate.
I can't drink every day, T. Frank.
There's only 3 days on the weekend. Like I save for the weekend personally.
I'm a family man. I dedicated my time to my children this weekend, since I won't pay attention to them for the next 10 of the next 11 weekends. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, so his wife was sick and he had to do that. So
yeah. Fitz, tell us about Antifragile.
I'd love to tell you about Antifragile. My favorite spot downtown, of course. Nate and I hit that up after our golf rounds. We hit it up on weekends. Sundays are fantastic down there. It is the best beer in State College. I will die on that hill right now. And I don't know if you mentioned it last week, but we got some really positive feedback from our listeners, our readers, that were going in there telling people, hey, I came to Antifragile because I heard about it on the Blue White Illustrated show or on the website. And I cannot tell you how appreciative we are of that. So thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you for trying their beer, because once you try their beer, you're going to go back because it's fantastic. You can also try the kombucha. The Moody Culture kombucha is terrific as well. Uncle John's, the cheesesteak shop out front. I know we've had a lot of people that have given us feedback to say it might be the best cheesesteak in State College. So it's definitely, the feedback has been awesome on that end, and the feedback from you guys has been awesome. So we are just tremendously appreciative. I saw the other day on Instagram, they're doing late night cheesesteaks. which,
Ooh, yeah.
that's got to be a place on your radar. I mean, if you're a student, if you're an adult, if you're both, I don't know. It is a fantastic opportunity to grab some really good food late night. So definitely check that out. They're open late Tuesday through Sunday, and Friday and Saturday night, or excuse me, they're open Tuesday through Sunday starting at 11, and they're open late nights Friday and Saturday. Of course, the collaborations keep coming. The Braylock Hazy IPA, Electric Atmospheres on draft and in kegs, Death by Mango with Warwick Farm, one of Pennsylvania's other best breweries, also in cans and draft. So definitely check it out. This game weekend is the weekend to do it. So get down to Antifragile. Again, mention Blue Illustrated. It's not going to get you anything, but it's going to get us some positive feedback. We love positive feedback, right, Nate?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just one point of clarification. They were there looking for us with pitchforks. But it's minor, just a minor detail after Penn State's uninspiring Bowling Green performance 2 weeks ago. Anyway,
I got the feedback before the game, so whatever happened.
In that case, that's true.
I needed it. I needed one after that game, but I'm not the only one.
As always, thanks to Antifragile, and thanks all of you for supporting the people who support this show. Now let's get into James Franklin's press conference from yesterday. Our thoughts on James Franklin's thoughts during his weekly press conference to begin the most important week, the most exciting week of your life, Kent State week.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
So there was a couple of things that I picked out from yesterday's press conference that I want to talk about that, we'll be discussing, and you're going to hear from James Franklin in just a second. But Nate, I wanted to get to you before we get into that. Was there something that piqued your interest that you want to throw out here as an opening salvo? And if it's one of our clips, just let me know and I'll play it.
Sure. The conversation regarding a lack of plays, I think, remains interesting, and it's like a subtext, right? I love subtext. I'm a big subtext guy, and for a team at this stage in the season, there are just so many offshoots of implications that are impacted by what is at this point. I mean, I pulled the stat. Penn State is 113th nationally in plays run per game. And understand there are a couple of other teams in there that are not bad company to be in. Oregon has not run a ton of plays. Georgia has not run a ton of plays at this point in the season. But what James Franklin is talking about is, hey, Penn State's offense has either been feast or famine so far this season. And that famine side of things, even if it doesn't necessarily mean points, it needs to be cleaned up for a variety of reasons.
We're going to get into the other half of the conversation here in just 1 second, but I do want to ask you this as a follow-up, which is one that I think is more important than Penn State fans wanting to see stats. Julian Fleming getting catches, Liam Clifford, everyone wants to take a victory lap of I knew he wasn't, blah, blah, blah. Does it matter to the players that they're not getting catches or yards or, those stats or making meaningful plays? Because we can talk about Julian Fleming doing all the dirty work and being explosive in the sense of helping explosive plays, but does it matter that there are not as many plays to go around to the players specifically?
Yes.
That's an important thing.
It's the uncomfortable thing that all fans want to look at their team and say, oh, the culture is so strong that everyone is just in it for everyone else. It's such a team bond. It's such a good thing and a good culture. And I do think that exists at Penn State, and I am not aware of any problems. But what I can tell you is if these things fester, if one game turns into two games turns into 3, 4, 5, and some of your playmakers or the people who anticipate having an opportunity to touch the ball don't touch the ball, it's problematic. It's an issue. There's any number of ways to spin it, but I think that, again, the subtext of what James Franklin is saying is you want to have a healthy locker room that has everybody involved. Micah Shrewsbury used to call it locker room lawyering, right? Oh, I should have gotten the ball. I should have had, so many in basketball, so many shots. Well, in football, it's so many touches, right? So many receptions, so many carries, so many targets, right? What you do with the targets is up to you. But if they're not even looking your way, or if you can't get a pass thrown in your direction, then it becomes a frustrating point that might start small, but has the potential to grow larger as the season goes on. So I think that there's a duality to this of Penn State needs it for that reason to make everybody happy or as many people happy as you possibly can, but also, he calls it chasing ghosts, but giving opposing defensive coordinators something to think about.
Yeah.
The fewer guys that you have involved in your offense that are going to make plays, the less time that they're going to spend focusing on those players. And it allows them to devote more energy and attention to the guys that you do have making plays, which becomes, again, problematic.
And just one last thing, because I know you wrote about this yesterday, and Bane Train brings up the point that I think is interesting here. He says, I love explosive plays, but they need a sustainable offense and drives that also has explosive plays. So in other words, they need to have a bulletproof offense. They need to have a perfect offense at that point.
No.
Is that a fair goalpost to be aiming for?
The fair goalpost is fewer 3 and outs, 4 and outs, 5 and outs. That's the goalpost. It's not about, you're going to score a touchdown on every possession. You know that's not true. But Penn State has had way too many. The percentage is nearly 50% of Penn State's possessions, non-garbage time possessions, have been 3 and outs or 4 and outs. Like that's no good. That's not what Penn State wants. If they can cut that in half and make it 25%, they're in much better territory, and it leads to much more success.
And Bane Train, this is a great thread of conversation. He says, is a philosophy of how many deep passes or feast, famine, run calls. There are not many feast, famine, run calls. Like, all run calls are designed for a touchdown. Like, ideally, if you block it perfectly and the running back beats a safety, that's a touchdown. So they're all explosive run plays in the mind of the offensive coordinator. That's just that's a minor point, but I think a great conversation topic. Fitz, you had something you wanted to say there?
Yeah, just the easy argument is the explosive plays cut that down. But when you take a look at the third down metrics, when you take a look at the third down and distance, like that's an issue that needs to be ironed out, because that's where you're losing plays. It's not because you're scoring too much on 3-play drives. And hey, do more 3-play. You know what? Score on 7 3-play drives and you're not worried about it. But you gotta have some sort of balance, especially in the second half of last weekend.
And this conversation has come up, I think, specifically talking about penalties. James Franklin has mentioned penalties. It's something that's easy for us on this side of the camera to harp on. And he talked about that when asked about penalties during the bye week and getting those in order for the offense and the defense.
So just some things that we got to get cleaned up. We're giving yards away and making things more challenging. So that is a major priority for us. I think we've talked about this in the past. If you look statistically at where penalties rank in terms of winning and losing, it's nowhere near what the turnover ratio is and what explosive plays are. But it makes for a sloppy game. It makes for a game that as a head coach, you're not proud to watch. And it also just makes it difficult to get into a rhythm. I think it also has impacted time of possession, which has been a problem in our first 2 games, specifically in the first half. So we need to get those things cleaned up. But
I wanted to point out what he says there, and I think this is really important to keep in context as we have this conversation. In order of importance, penalties are not first. You want to be clean and sharp, and you want to not give away free yards, and that can bite you against good teams. But if your explosive plays far outweigh your penalties, you're going to win the game odds on. So, Fitz, how do you view this particular nuance of the conversation of we're focusing on the penalties, we're focusing on the time of possession, but all the other metrics seem to be healthy in terms of the way the offense is performing?
Yeah, I think they're 2 of 4 there. You look at the 4 things that they break down, and penalties and third downs are definitely something that needs to be improved. I mean, they're not as dire as we've seen them before, but they need to be improved. The issue that I have there is you've left points, you've given points back with especially the Amari Evans push off last game. You've given yards back and first downs back with, I think, of the Drew Shelton holding, which was not a hold, but like it
Right.
still got flagged, so it matters. So that's giving up not only a first down, but also a nice completion gain, confidence builder for Drew and Trey Wallace. Those are the little things that keep coming back to haunt you. So, I can deal with. I said this after the West Virginia game. You can deal with some of the things where they're jumping off sides because they're all amped up. Like, you can deal with that, and that stuff will get cleaned up in time as Abdul Carter and those guys learn to play in that scenario, play off of that snap count and things like that. But it's those ones that just bring back points, bring back yards, bring back first downs. Those are the ones that are killing you because that's an extra three plays, and these little things add up. He said, 15 plays every half or something like that. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That seems like a lot to me.
It's not
but
that.
It's not that. It's killing those 3 and outs. It's killing those short drives. I mean, you look at how Penn State turned things around in the third quarter against Bowling Green. Well, there was 2 3 and outs on defense. Bowling Green ran 6 plays in the third quarter. That's how you do it. And you flip-flop that around and sort of say, how do you avoid that from a Bowling Green standpoint? So that's where I'm at with that. It's just a lot of excess. You're in the kitchen and you're carving up the steaks and things like that. Of course, you got to turn that excess into burgers. You got to turn that excess into stuff that you can use, and that's how you add up and make up that, I think, 12 play difference for a whole game.
Nate, did you have something look like you?
Yeah, I was just
want to jump in.
Do we have time? Can I just? I'll do it very quickly. I promise.
Yeah. A quick rant.
Yeah,
Love it. Let's get to it.
No, Penn State's non-scoring possessions. Okay, this season, non-scoring possessions. The first one at West Virginia was a fumble. Fine. 3 plays 4 yards. Punt. 3 plays 1 yard. Punt. 3 plays 6 yards. Punt. 5 plays 19 yards. Punt. Right. That's a problem. Like those. That's the issue. Is it's either a touchdown or it is a punt after only 3 plays. Against Bowling Green, 3 plays -8 yards, punt. 5 plays 0 yards, punt. This one, right? 9 plays, 51 yards, interception. That's better.
Right.
That is better than the 3 yards, the three plays in the punt. So
it also leads into field position for the defense too, which again, if you do that against good teams that can make plays against your defense, you're then it's that attrition of field position that everyone is familiar with as they, from traditional football. There's one thing I want to add in here just as a final thing. Nate, did you?
No, that's it. That's good.
Okay.
That's good. There has to be a space in between the two that Penn State can occupy that will represent progress. And that's, I think, what they are fighting for at this point.
So my question yesterday during James Franklin's conversation with the media ties into this conversation as well because of the nature of the defenses they faced so far. Bowling Green played a lot of quarters defense, and that defense gives up explosive plays. So if you're big play hunting, this ties into you're not throwing underneath. You're not throwing to a guy who's going to get open against zones underneath, and your targets primarily go to your explosive players. Tyler Warren is too big for a safety. Omari Evans is too fast for a safety. Trey Wallace is too everything for a safety or a Bowling Green corner when you target those guys down the field against these defenses that you feel like you can manipulate in coverage. So if, first off, somebody isn't fully healthy and they're still out there competing, that's one thing. But if they're not a guy who profiles as, hey, I want to go 45 yards on this pass play, then maybe Julian Fleming isn't getting targets because they're not playing a lot of teams that are playing safer coverages that make you dink and dunk the football down the field. So that plays into that aspect of it. And as James Franklin explained, when you're playing that quarter-style defense, they're trying to get 9 players in the box. So either you hit the rotation correctly and you attack where the safety isn't and you get a big run, or they flood the point of attack with multiple bodies and you get 2 yards. So there is a little bit of this is against those particular styles of defense. There is this situation is the byproduct of that. And you would love to be so good that it doesn't matter. but there are just some times, and this is I'm thinking specifically of what happened against Bowling Green and not as much against West Virginia, because they played a lot of a different coverage in the first half, and Penn State beat that anyway. But that's kind of the nature of some of these things. The next thing, especially the fixation, I'd say, on improvement during the bye week heading into this week, is the defense and their play during the first half of that game against Bowling Green. Part of that was KJ Winston and his status during that game. James Franklin updated us sort of on the safety position yesterday.
I don't really have any new information to share with you guys at this stage. I probably will, I would think, probably post-practice, when I see you guys later in the week. And then obviously, Day Lane is the next guy that we've been trying to get reps for. Obviously, when you're talking about, Jay Reed and Zachy, those two guys played a ton of football for us and will need to continue. Day's another guy that, we've been trying to get more reps and more experience. That'll be important, but we're going to have to develop, a few more guys.
Nate, I want to come to you quickly for the first part of that. The coded message from James Franklin there. First off, is this an opening, talking a little bit more about Caden Saunders later in the press conference, a little more of an open door policy with these questions about injuries? Or I guess what's your interpretation of yesterday's conversation about that?
Yeah, honestly, he threw me a little bit for a loop, because I think my first impression of what he said is I don't have anything to tell you right now, but I probably will on Wednesday. If you're reading between the lines, could be hey, this is where we work out everybody being on the same page about talking about a season-ending injury, right? That's in the past. My issue with that is not in any way my impression of what's going on there. Like, that's not.
I'm glad you left us there for a second, man.
I got you. I hooked you. No, but then he also, I mean, again, like, James Franklin chooses his words fairly carefully most of the time. When he did talk about the safety situation and having a fourth safety ready, or in this case, third safety, he talked about it in short-term terms. Right. He was like, in the short term, you need this immediately. So I would be surprised if that's what the situation was there with KJ. But, he said conflicting things in terms of patterns of how he typically talks on this one.
That's why I wanted to go to you first on that one. Fitz.
Yeah, let me take the bullet. Good.
What do you think about this particular conversation with safety depth and the status of these players and their general importance here?
Yeah, general importance would be an understatement there. All those three safeties need to be healthy. You saw it when Jalen Reed went out against West Virginia for a couple of plays. It was just kind of juggling. You saw it when KJ Winston went out, and I think they'll be fine in the long run. I agree with Nate. But yeah, you've got to get somebody else ready. And again, playing three linebackers with Dom DeLuca out there is not as advantageous for your defense as playing with three safeties out there. And if Dejon Lane can be a guy that's at least, I say it with the offensive lineman, they can get in the way. Can this guy at least get in the way? Can this guy at least be in the right spot or be directed into the right spot? Because I think he's got the athleticism to make it work. Yep. It's just a matter of, like, that experience is not, you can't replace the experience of those first three guys. So, I wrote about this yesterday morning. Dejon Lane had a good week of practice, and they're optimistic that he can do it, but it's still, the reality has to sink in that it's going to be a heck of a drop off between any of those first three and whoever they trot out there fourth.
Yeah, and I'm just going to reiterate what I always say. Football is really hard, and to understand all of the nuances of what you're doing and be right, to not make a mistake in football is the first thing, and that's where freshmen have the most problem. Not making plays, it's not making mistakes. And so that's what I think the focus is, just get him up to speed there, because as Fitz said, the athleticism and the traits, you're very excited about that. We got to see him during the bye week, and I think all of us were pretty impressed, Nate, with his one-on-one performance during our first opportunity to see any one-on-one with the skill positions last week. What was your impression of him when you were watching him in those situations?
I don't know if that was something that I personally saw. I was over with the defensive line most of the time, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were there. I thought I was standing. I swear I was standing next to you during the one-on-ones. I'm sorry.
listen, do not ask me for my evaluation of players. That is your wheelhouse, sir.
All right. Well, he literally got his hands on a football, and he was 2 for 2. So like,
He's
from
awesome.
from a counting standpoint. Like that was pretty good last week. Last thing I have here is the game plan. I thought this was an interesting conversation about how teams try to attack the Penn State defense and the whole conversation about not getting any sacks so far and the fact that teams are trying to get the ball out quickly.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of always been the case. I mean, we've been as successful in sacking the quarterback and tackles for loss as, arguably any program in the country over the last 10 years. We're part of that argument. So I think that's always kind of the plan. Like what you want to try to do, right, is you want to say, okay, what is the strength of the defense we're playing this week? And how do we nullify that strength as much as possible? Quick game, screens, move the pocket, run the ball, keep the game close. Because the other thing that you can do to really throw a curveball to that game plan is get up by enough points early in the game that they need to get away from that game plan. So, creating 3 and outs and turnovers and scoring on early drives on offense and get them down by, 17, 21 points where they feel like they're going to have to throw the ball more to get back in the game.
So it's kind of a cyclical thing, a little bit of a longer conversation, a little bit of a longer clip from James Franklin. But Fitz, this idea that the pass rush isn't performing well does have to have the context of they're not in a position to succeed if the ball is out in 2.17 seconds in the first half against Bowling Green. What's your assessment of getting the pass rush on track? How much is there that you think is valid in that conversation?
I think there's some, but I think it's going to be fine. Like I don't know that Kent State's going to be the barometer of that because Penn State should run them over pretty good. I didn't watch that Tennessee game, but it looks scary from just following along the game tracker there. But I think it'll be fine. The argument of moving Abdul Carter back to linebacker to me is, as a full-time basis, a non-starter. Like he's been good. Like I understand that he's not doing what people want him to do and that collapsing everything. And if you watch that game against Bowling Green, they paid all the attention to Abdul Carter. Now, that's got to open it up for some other guys. I think Zane Durant's playing really well. It's got to open it up for some other guys in the interior. It's got to open it up on the other side there. Deny Dennis Sutton, Amin Vanover, those two that should benefit from that. But Penn State hasn't been able to do that. I think Bowling Green's, their game plan last week, I think Penn State's going to probably see a decent amount. Like we talk about, on the defensive side, programs taking away and making Drew beat them on the outside until he does it. And I think he started to turn that corner. Well, Penn State's going to, have to guard the short stuff, guard the quick stuff, because, they know what's on the other side. Scott Loftus said it after the game. That's a first round pick. Like that is a guy that is doing things that changes your game plan as an offensive coordinator. So putting him in a splash position like defensive end just makes sense. And I think he's like it's been one of those ones where it's a knee-jerk reaction. He doesn't have any sacks. He doesn't have, all the splash plays that you had hoped. But double argument here. Number one, he wasn't as good of a linebacker as you remember. Like that's one thing that I keep going back to. And number two, it's not as important to be as a game-wrecking linebacker as it is to be a game-wrecking defensive end. And he can still do that. And if he gets the opportunity to do that against maybe a further drop back, he's going to get there because he's pretty close.
Yeah. I just the whole conversation there about how the score dictates and leading back to our conversation about the offense being efficient and getting some more drives and putting the pressure on the offense to the opposing offense to then throw the ball more. I mean, that's half the game. But this is something I talked about the last 2 years with Manny Diaz is the actual personality of the defense has already given you an advantage coming into a game because everyone knows you're going to bring pressure, whether it is with, you're going to win with your edge defenders and Zane Durant, or you're going to blitz or show blitz pressure. if the offense is only throwing quick game, running the football, and getting the ball out quickly, those are not explosive plays. So if your whole thing is stopping explosive plays and getting explosive plays, the personality of your defense is doing that before you even snap the football.
Unless you can't tackle, and then they become explosive plays.
Yes,
that was
yes.
the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, or you just you have a whoopsie in coverage, which they had a couple whoopsies in coverage last week. Yep. Anything left here that you guys want to cover with James Franklin, or some of these conversations here with the pressure here to clean up at the end? Nate, you got anything?
Do you think it's worth my, now that we're talking about it, do you think it's worth my time to go back and find time and score of every sack Penn State has had over the last 3 years? Like, do you think that bears itself out? Do you think that Penn State has had a lead and that more of their sacks have come in the second half of games than in the first half?
You scared me with the amount of work. Like, I was just imagining how much that would be.
No, I'm saying for myself. I got plenty of time.
I know. And I was afraid for it. Like, I just imagined, I had a little bit of empathy. I'm like, Nate, don't do that. Don't do that. It is, I wouldn't say there's a direct correlation.
Communication?
But yeah. What's that?
Sorry. Communication? I thought you were changing the subject. Did we talk about communication?
We haven't.
We're talking about it in the chat a little bit.
But let me just answer Nate's question here, and we'll get to communication for sure, because that's something we talked about yesterday on message board quite a bit.
No, I'm messing up the communication. Great.
It's it's like running the football. People say if you run the ball 30 times, you win the game, or you were ahead, and at the end of the game, you bled the clock, and so therefore you ran the ball a lot. If you have 6 sacks at the end of the game because you got a bunch of pressure early in the game, and those pressure turn into sacks, but a guy like Chop Robinson could just blow that whole strategy up, where he's getting immediate quick wins in the first half, and they should be sacks. So I guess yeah, like I do think that there probably is an imbalance towards second half sacks and those turning from pressures into sacks. I think that is something that would be super interesting. Sorry that I totally derailed the show.
I asked the question. That's my fault.
Fitz, the communication issues. Can you just recap for us what James Franklin talked about yesterday with that?
Yeah, I mean, he talked about it a little bit after the game, but also yesterday it was just basically the headset, right? Like that they can simulate it all you want, and you don't think about it, but when that stadium is loud is when you're on defense, and it wasn't something that really caught my attention in the first place. Like when I was thinking about this offseason, thinking about the rule changes and how this would affect, you're of course thinking about the other team's quarterback. Well, you're not thinking about your own guys. And you look at last week's first half, and those guys were rattled. I mean, they did not know where to line up, did not know coverages. You take a look at the secondary. Part of missing tackles is being in the wrong spot when that guy catches the football. Like that, those are the things that really came out. And you take KJ Winston out of it, it's just a giant cluster. That's how it came about. But yeah, they really struggled, and they went to some more traditional signage. Credit to Tom Allen, James Franklin for having that contingency plan ready. Like that's an overlooked aspect of the game last week, is getting everybody on the same page. Maybe it takes going back to last year's signals. Maybe it takes going back to what they put in camp, as if your headset goes out, like that's a big deal. And hopefully for Penn State's sake, they've worked on it, because when Ohio State comes to town, that's going to be a loud building, and Ohio State's quarterback's not going to be the only one dealing with the difficulties that are presented by that opportunity. So I'm very curious to see how they fix it. It's interesting to see those green dot helmets, because they have holes, like the ear hole is covered up to take away that. But that's a problem. I think they saw it might be an issue, but they didn't know it until they were in the situation. So that's a tough one to go through.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, better to have it against Bowling Green than against Ohio State. Nate, I know we talked about this a lot yesterday. Do you have anything you wanted to discuss with the communication conversation?
No, I think it's what I'm curious to see is how they resolve it, because it sounded to me like it was isolated between the linebackers communicating with, or the linebacker, in this case, Kobe King, communicating with the defensive line is not at issue. The issue is how the secondary gets the call, because the linebacker turning around, having that conversation with the safety, getting that message out to the corners, and doing so while not taking the linebacker's eyes off of his own assignment is where the issues come in. And so does it become a unit wide, hey, you're just going to the cards, or is it, hey, we're going to have signals for the secondary, literally, right?
Yeah.
And maybe in two different places, right? One for the safeties, for the corners, and then keep going with the green dot for that front seven.
Yeah,
So
because all the pre-snap adjustments were handled by the safeties anyway, so they were communicating their adjustments without the linebackers being involved anyway. So that makes sense.
And you think about the complexity of a defensive call, offense and defense is so far advanced in the last 20 years in terms of the how much they put into those play calls. It's ridiculous because you're talking about the dummy call, you're talking about the adjustment call, you're talking about like basically 3 defensive calls for every play or every snap.
Yeah.
So that's going to take away your ability to disguise what you want to do if you can't get your guys on the same page to begin with.
Yeah, and I think it's always important to remember, because I forget this a lot of the time, the defense has no idea if it's a run or a pass before the play, so they've got to have a run and pass plan. Cleaning up a couple things from the chat. Stephen Light, when talking about the touches for the offensive players, he says it's the same thing in any high-performance workplace. People move if they don't get opportunities. Yeah, and that's an important thing to make sure everyone is involved and feels valued in the offense above what we were talking about of not having any targets and doing the dirty work. Also, there's a conversation about Tamir Robinson and what's going on with him. One of the reasons I said this is our featured article this week, I dropped the link in the live chat. Check out what Fitz had to write about last week's bye week practices. That is what I got from the chat so far. So let's get to your comments and questions in the BWI Mailbag. We made this mistake last week, but we're going to do it again. Poncho570 says top 5 players you're hoping to see play this weekend. Let's do this as part 2. So, Fitz, what are the top 5 players you're hoping to see play this weekend that we have not seen yet?
Much better chance of it happening this weekend. Kent State. Oh boy, that's a tough one, man. You're looking at a 71-0 loss to Tennessee last weekend, and actually that kind of puts pressure on Penn State because Tennessee and Penn State very close in the rankings right now. So like Penn State's going to be incentivized to run it up as well, and Kent State nowhere near Bowling Green's capabilities. As I said that, we definitely underestimated Bowling Green, even though we said they're a good MAC team. We did not realize what that meant. And that was pretty bad on us. Going back to the actual question at hand, we go back to Ethan Grunkmeyer, Quentin Martin. Those two guys are guys that I hope to see. I think we're going to see a lot of Cam Wallace, or maybe more of Cam Wallace sprinkled in the first half with those other running backs. But does it get to Quentin Martin? This is one of those games where you've got a 4-game red shirt planned. I think you're going to see those guys. So Quentin Martin's an interesting one. Tyseer Denmark as well on the offensive side of the ball. So those guys are the ones that I'm really looking at, and hopefully, fingers crossed here, you get to see them maybe in the third quarter and get a decent amount of reps, because those are valuable reps. Those are whether you're watching the game at that point or not. And I know we've got some guys that chart every snap all the way up to the kneel down in the fourth quarter, and all glory to you guys. But yeah. Right. It's those are very important snaps for them to get an idea of the surroundings, get an idea. Catching a pass in Beaver Stadium is different than catching a ball in Holuba Hall. It's different than catching a ball at Lash. It's different than catching it on the high school field. So, excuse me. So those are 3 guys that I think are obvious in terms of looking at what we want to see this weekend. Grunkmeyer was questionable for Bowling Green. I did not note if he was at practice. I wasn't in practice last week. So, hopefully he's healthy enough to do so. He was there. So hopefully he's good enough to do so. And, maybe see some fireworks from those younger guys.
Nate, who are the players you're interested in watching this week? I'm going to put some up on from the chat, but who do you want to see? What are the top 5 players for you?
I think Dakari Nelson stands out as a position of need to get up to speed very quickly.
Yeah.
So he definitely stands out to me. I think that it wouldn't hurt to continue to try to speed up Javen Williams' progression, right? To have a 4th tackle that's ready to go and contribute. I just like Tyler Holsworth, so if they got that far, I'd be cool with that. And then certainly I think for as much as Lane is of like, if you need your fourth to become the third, you also need a fifth to become the fourth. And so I think Colin Dinkins in that case becomes interesting as well. So certainly there is no right answer to this question, because they need as many of those guys to be involved and to get meaningful snaps in a game as they possibly can. And I think that's where they're at right now.
Can I just throw in two quickly? One, I want to see maybe Caden Saunders on offense, if that's in the cards. And two, Khalil Dinkins, getting those players that need to contribute and kind of bolster the depth or be starters. Khalil Dinkins started the season as a presumed starter. Seeing him catch one pass and play 8 plays, I think it'd be important to see him. Fitz, what do you got?
I actually have a starter as well. Luke Reynolds started against Bowling Green, and that's a hidden fact. But this is a guy that's, all of a sudden with Rappelier out for an extended period of time, he's going to be called upon. And Franklin said it yesterday. We wrote it yesterday morning, but he's a green light now for Penn State. And I think that that's very important to get him reps, not only in his current role, but Dinkins is going to be back. Dinkins is going to play, so he's going to be the number 3, but also get him some reps as the number 1 tight end, where what Tyler Warren's doing now might be what you have to see from Luke Reynolds as a as a true sophomore next year. So getting those reps from a different angle are certainly important, rather than being the second H-back or whatever he's playing right now.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point there. This is going to be basically the same question, but more specific, and I'm gonna limit it here. PSU Jam asks, do you think we see guys like Martin and Granville make appearance in this game, or will they save their 4 games for the end of the season when they might need them for depth? We've talked about Quentin Martin a little bit, but Max Granville, the 18-year-old freshman who should still be in high school, I think that's a fair conversation about this particular game this early in the season. I don't know the difference that 2 months can make from a physical standpoint in season, but Nate, what do you think about seeing Max Granville? Do you think that's a realistic thing this weekend?
Maybe. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know where the staff falls on his necessity, right? Because you have 4 there at defensive end that have experience, and I think you would feel pretty good about. But at the same time, if something happens there, if you lose any one of those guys, then that throws you in a little bit of a tailspin. And if you do have the opportunity, right? You just said that you don't know how much 2 months plays a difference. I think it plays a ton of difference in their minds, at least, that like all of the interactions that or all of the things that I've ever heard from James Franklin talking about specifically, they might not be ready for game 1, but we might need them in game 5 or 6, so suggests that that's real.
To clarify though, it's for some of those guys, it's about their mental maturity. Going back to football is hard. And for Max, I'm more on the point of, if he's 230 pounds right now or whatever he is, can he be 240 by November, where that's more of a playable weight for a defensive end, where then you hit the postseason and you could maybe factor him into the plan. I guess that's the point of in season is different than off season when it comes to weight training, weight gain, et cetera, et cetera. That's the part I guess Fitz. I don't know about where that progression can get you in that amount of time if you're still trying to like practice and be a part of the team in a sense of, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the schedule after this weekend, we're a quarter of the way through the season. Like that's the thing that I keep going back to when I see this 4-game balance is they've got an opportunity to get extended reps at this point, which is very important. Like it's not going to change the outlook for defensive end with a guy like Granville for 2024, but you can play a bunch and really, really benefit from it. I do think he's going to play on Saturday. I think we talked about him and Jalen Harvey, kind of playing that balance. If you need to get an 8-game red shirt, I guess they're calling it now, or whatever it is, 4 and 4, you've got, sorry, I'm not a math guy. You've got 11 games left to do it. So there's, 10 games left to do it, because that bowl game doesn't count. So yeah, I mean, I think you do see him, and I think you've got an opportunity for him to get extended time, especially, I mean, you don't want to say it because it's so daggone disrespectful and condescending to Kent State, but Kent State lost to St. Francis a couple weeks ago. This is the time to get these guys reps and maybe even sprinkle them in earlier than we would expect. I mean, you look back to this was the Delaware game last year. They got a lot of guys in that Delaware game last year, and it was not something that was like overly beneficial to someone to play at the end of the season, but that stuff adds up eventually. And Max Granville, again, I understand the appeal of him being a quick twitch guy off the edge, and Penn State's kind of missing that at this point. But like you're fully focused on Max Granville for 2025 right now. Like that is the important part with Max Granville. So get in these snaps, get him in there. And if you have to, quote unquote, use somebody for depth later in the season, whether it's a long-term thing, a short-term thing, you've got Harvey there as well. And Malachi Williams is back from injury as well. So you've got an opportunity to sort of sprinkle those guys in. Jordan Mayer is he's played in the first 2 games. So that's a guy that you can add in there for depth. They had the kid from Nazareth, Jake Wilson, there last year, sort of playing that role as a guy that can, sort of fill in for a couple spots if they need him to. So I think you get more out of playing Granville right now. I'm curious to see if they played Harvey on the other side as well, but you get more from playing those guys than you do sort of saving it. And by the end of the season, hey, if you need them, that red shirt really doesn't matter anyway, does it?
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing here on the show. It kind of folds into the conversation we skipped in the rundown of, I don't know how to talk about this game. And as Fitz said, like, want to be respectful to the opponent coming up. But we're talking all about young players in depth this week. So let's spin that conversation forward for our last question here from Will Gamble, who says, who is someone on Penn State that we will be talking about a lot more at the back end of the schedule? We just mentioned a couple of players, couple of positions, those particular situations. So Fitz, I'll come back to you to start the end of this conversation here. Who is somebody you think will factor in that is, as we talked about, week 5, 6, 7, going to be ready to contribute as opposed to week 1, 2, 3, 4?
I mean, typically this question would be Omari Evans, but Omari seems to be ahead of that curve from where we expected him to be, at least coming into the season. He's done a really nice job developing into that deep threat, being a guy that they trust to go at. So you got to look different spot on the depth chart, same position. But Liam Clifford, I still think, is going to have a decent role. He was banged up to come into the season, didn't play a lot. T. Frank, I know you and I looked at the snap counts against West Virginia. He was in on 3 passing downs, I believe it was, 18 running downs against West Virginia. So there's obviously a method to the madness there. He is yet to be targeted this year. He came out of camp as the number 2 receiver for Penn State for a reason. And I think he's going to continue to be a guy that they need, because if you're going to saddle targets on one guy, whether that be Trey Wallace or Tyler Warren, it's not there. You got to have a guy that's sort of in that median. And I think Liam Clifford's that guy still.
Yeah. Nate, do you have somebody in mind, maybe on defense, that we might be talking about later in the season as opposed to now?
I mean, I was going to go with Drew Aller. I don't think he's being talked about enough, and I mean that actually.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't think there's enough conversation about the changes that he made and the improvements that he made. And I understand it's early. People are hesitant from jumping the gun, but I think he has taken very clear steps in his ability to be the guy. Right. And to me, that was the outstanding question coming into the season. And he's beginning the process of answering it. And Mac the Mustard Man agrees with me. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
I rest my case.
Wow. Especially from Mac. Like that's
right there.
That's high praise from somebody who does not give positivity out willy-nilly. It's funny because like we ended the show, you and I, last week, kind of yelling about how he's improved, and I made it like a whole separate video for the YouTube channel. So I was like, "Oh, you're kidding? Oh no, you're right. Like that is a fair point to make." That nobody even asked about Drew Aller yesterday and his improvement so far this year. So kudos to you for a very strong point. One last question, and I'm going to throw out a player to you guys. Just a quick, like very quick, maybe even yes or no. Cooper Cousins. Everyone's very excited about him. The depth is strong on the interior. They are playing well. Later on the season, Fitz, do you think he is a player that has meaningful snaps and is contributing?
I do. I'm curious how they're going to do it because JB Nelson's playing a lot. Venga has developed into probably Penn State's best offensive lineman so far. Like there's a lot of guys in there, and I don't think upsetting center is something that they want to do. Like I don't think that throwing the true freshman at center, I don't think Nick Dawkins has been to the point where he's warrants being replaced, if that makes sense. And you need continuity there. So yes, I do think we see more of him. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know if tackle becomes an issue, an option, not so much with Cousins, but maybe with Nelson, maybe with somebody else. That's excuse me, I didn't mean to burp in the microphone. I think that he's going to be a part of it. I just don't know how. So yeah, that was a really unprofessional move by me, and I apologize.
I thought you handled it well in the situation, Nate. Your final thoughts
about players, or can I move on to basketball?
Whatever.
Recruiting? Okay.
Do it. Dealer's choice. Do what you want.
Penn State basketball has a potential commitment. Kid is Mason Blackwood. He's a wing. He's deciding between Penn State and Rutgers on Wednesday. Please join us at the site. I will have full coverage of that on Wednesday afternoon. And
I will just remind you that you can get it for $1, 2 months with promo code PSU1. There is not, people use the word literally too much. Literally, there's not a better time for you to use that promo code to get the most out of BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because you got basketball, you got football, you've got all kinds of great stuff from all different angles. Wrestling's going to be starting soon at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So join us because we're leaving now and we have to go. We don't love saying goodbye, but we will be back tomorrow, and we never go away if you join us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We'll talk to you then.